Hey, everybody. Thank you and welcome to the Dylan Teaches Finance podcast this week, where we have fun, easy, relaxed conversations about something we don't usually feel fun and easy to talk about: money. Today on the show, we have David Hill, writer. You might have read him in the magazines. He wrote a book. He wrote for the New York Times. He was guessing who was winning every NFL game last season for the Times. That was his job. And he's going to talk about how do you work and have children and have a partner and own a home being a freelancer. What are the things you get to say yes to? Like maybe going on vacations, but you have to say no to. Maybe saving for college for your kids. And we'll talk about how he thinks about that. But he says yes to retirement, how to build up that savings. And I think he's got a really cool way of building up savings, how he stashes his cash. And we'll talk about that in the show. If you enjoy what you're listening to, subscribe on the YouTubes. Go ahead, do it. And if you want to, subscribe on anywhere you get your podcasts. If you really enjoy it, or just even marginally enjoy it, just a few sentences, why don't you give us a nice review on those podcast locations as well? Thank you for listening and enjoy the podcast. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for coming. And welcome, Dave Hill, writer, comedian, extraordinary father, child of parents, or parent of children. Thanks for coming on, Dave.
Nobody's called me a comedian in a long time, if ever.
Dave, I know you as a writer, and you were a writer's writer. You used to work for the Writers Guild even. And so you were like very much in the thick of the writing world. And I wanted to have you on because you're a freelancer. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is like, and for a lot of people, it's like, how do freelancers, come up with their ideas? How do you pitch? How do you think about what you're going to go and do with these ideas and where you take them? But also, like, how do you manage money with it? Like, how do you manage your relationships and your decisions and having kids? So I want to hear about all those things today. My first question I like to ask, how did you, as a thumbs up bubble comes up for some reason, Dave, how would you say you learned about money?
Well, I think I learned about money fairly late in life. I didn't grow up with any. And not only did I not grow up with any, I grew up with parents that I think were pretty bad with it. So any lessons that I may have learned when I was young about money, I had to unlearn them all, right? Because they were all wrong. But it took me a long time to figure that out. I think that one of the things about becoming an adult is the gradual process of learning what all that your parents did not know and were wrong about, and that they're not infallible people, right? And this is one for me that was a big one, was learning that my parents were pretty awful with money. So I think I had to learn it all. I had to build that airplane in the air, so to speak.
Can you give me an example of something you noticed maybe or realized looking back that they were not great at?
Well, they didn't save any money for sure. It was paycheck to paycheck. Some of that is a function of just being broke. Like not everybody can save money because folks maybe only make enough to pay their bills. But I think also like, just struggling to figure out how to like what to prioritize, right? Especially once you have kids, figuring out what types of bills need to be paid first. That all changes as you grow,
Yeah.
right? Like as you get older and as your kids get older, your priorities have to shift. And I'm not so sure my folks were so great at shifting those priorities as they got older, as we got older, whatever. So I didn't, but look, I mean, I guess all I'm saying is that like, I grew up in a family, didn't have any money, and didn't know nothing really. And once I got out of high school, I went to college. That's when I think it was a real shock to me, was about how little my parents didn't go to college. You know what I mean? Like it was like the whole thing I had to kind of figure it out on my own.
What did you learn in college? Because I've talked to a lot of people also where college can be like overwhelming with money as well, getting credit cards
Yeah.
and just being like, oh yeah, just live every weekend, essentially.
For me, college was 100% on me. Like my parents didn't have any money to help me out or to pay for anything. Like I had to do it all myself. I had 3 jobs when I was in college, and I was taking out loans. I never lived in a dorm because when I applied to college, I didn't know that you had to apply separately for housing. And so when my parents dropped me off at college, they said, "Where do you live?" And I said, "I don't know." And
Oh,
I had to
man.
find a furnished apartment like the first day I got to town. Like it was ridiculous. The
Yeah.
blind leading the blind, so like I always lived in apartments and with roommates the whole time I was in college. And yeah, I just always had multiple jobs that I was juggling. So I had to figure out how to manage money from day one. I was on my own really from day one. So, it was a crash course.
Yeah, it's how it is for a lot of folks, I think, just not knowing. But you came out ahead, graduated, and then where did you go after school?
Well, I didn't graduate. I dropped out, and I was one of the 3 jobs that I had when I was in college. I was a union job, and I got kind of involved in my union at that job, and they sent me to do like an internship one summer for the union in Washington D.C. And I came back from that full of just filled with vim and vigor about how I wanted to get involved and become a union organizer. So I dropped out of school and went to work for the union and did that for about 15 years, and traveled the
Yeah.
country as a union organizer.
Oh my gosh, yeah. I Of course you did that. I remember now you were obviously working in the union when we met, the Writers Guild, but yeah, how many careers you've had.
I know I'm on like Act 3 now, but like the first, the Writers Guild was like my last stop. I spent a bunch of years traveling the country, helping workers, organize unions, and I worked everywhere in America, and I lived in hotels probably over 200 something days a year. And so in terms of money, like I was able to just like sock away I didn't make a lot of money at that job, but I didn't have a lot of expenses either, because I worked all the time. So a lot, you'll hear about people that like maybe in their college years spent summers working on cruise ships or went to canneries or something where you
Yeah.
have like room and board, so you can say that's what this job was kind of like for me for like a decade was I could save so much money. So I think I first was able to have access to money because I had this job and I had no expenses and I was young and I was, able to save a lot, which kind of set me up for that second act of my life.
How did money influence that second act? Meaning, like, was it having that savings and having that security to be able to jump ship?
Yeah, and just sort of having an aversion to borrowing money. Like
Mm,
I always kind of always I got used to having savings and having money in the bank. And once I got used to that, I never wanted to not have that, because it was like a feeling I'd never had in my life before. So just like never wanting to like borrow or to deplete that and kind of try to live in a way where I could have access to that. And, once I left the labor movement and became a writer, I realized that life as a freelancer was going to be markedly different and was going to be much more precarious than my life had ever been before. But I think I set myself up well for that by having taught myself some discipline about saving money, because I think the life of a freelancer is all about saving money and anticipating sort of dry or fallow periods.
tell me through what is freelancer life for you now? What does it mean? Because I have some people who are definitely in that freelance creative space, but they have other people who are like, I have a 9 to 5 job,
Yeah.
get a paycheck every 2 weeks, pension. What what does like a week look like for you?
Well, I mean, no week is the same, really. I mean, there are weeks where I have no work, and there's weeks where I feel a little bit overwhelmed, right? I think that's, and the same is true for money, right? There's times where I feel flush, and there's times where where I feel, completely broke. And so it's all about understanding that there's going to be an ebb and a flow to it. And at this point, I've been full time freelance since, going on almost 10 years. So I've kind of gotten used to it by now. But in the beginning, it was really hard to learn that lesson. And yeah, what I say all the time is that like freelancers, we eat what we kill. Like you only are going to make what you kind of run out there and are able to sell, and that's not always. Some of that's in your control, and some of it's not.
Yeah, absolutely. There's gatekeepers. That's like you can have great content, great material, great ideas, but there's only so many people you pitch to now. Who do you, mm, Dave? I want to ask who you pitch to. Can I ask that question?
Sure, I don't care. Yeah, I mean, I a
Who
lot
do
of
you?
what well, first went full-time freelance because I sold a book proposal and got a book deal and thought that I was rich, and so I quit my job and said, "I'm a writer now," and, and then 5 years later was still working on that book and had no money and was completely broke. But I have learned over the years, how to, make money freelancing. Today, I primarily write for magazines. Occasionally I will write for, like a website or a podcast or something like that. I've kind of got it to the point now where my goal is to try to write, maybe a half dozen good stories a year and make enough money from those stories to kind of pay to make my nut for the year if I can. And then I'll supplement that throughout the year with simpler things, right? Like, I'll take sort of smaller gigs here and there on the side. But the thing I've had to learn how to balance is work that I know is really hard and time intensive and requires a lot of
Mm,
research or reporting and, a lot of my time versus work that's fairly, much easier for me to do that I can do from home, sitting at my computer or whatever. And understanding that like while the former might be more fun to do and might be more sort of creatively and intellectually rewarding for me, it also needs to pay the most because it's going to be the most taxing on my time. And so, I can't just take every job or every assignment or pitch every story that seems like an interesting thing that I want to write if I know that I'm not going to be able to get paid what it's actually, worth to me to do that story. And I've learned that lesson the hard way too,
yeah.
because I feel like I've sold a lot of stories over the years where I was grossly underpaid for it, but I desperately wanted to write it or thought that it was such a fun, assignment and it was exciting to do. But, I have 3 kids. Like I can't, fun to do won't feed my kids, right? So I have to think about that, right? I have to think about making sure that I'm fairly compensated. And that's a hard thing to figure out too.
Yeah, I assume that that's been a big change for the last 10 years of doing this. Is like, A, becoming a better writer, but also knowing exactly what's the right amount to ask for, how to pitch.
Yeah, and I mean, to answer your question more directly, like, this year I'm writing for Rolling Stone, I'm freelancing for them, but, the stories that I'm doing for them are kind of the examples of stories that I think are interesting and fun, but I think that they pay enough, they fairly compensate me for the time that it takes to report some of these stories that could take months to work on, right? But then I'll also have, I'll also pitch stories to smaller publications from time to time. I also will have kind of ongoing conversations or contracts with maybe a corporate client or with, uh, maybe some other types of media properties where I get paid to do stuff that's not necessarily journalism, it's not necessarily creative even, it's just sort of maybe like glorified copywriting or something, but it'll pay well and it'll, kind of keep me going during the months that it takes me to write this stuff that I think is a little bit more labor intensive and maybe more interesting.
So you work on the project, you get paid. How do you then, because you're making choices about how the income comes in, of like which ones to say yes, and you've probably gotten better and better and better saying like, okay, I know how many hours this is going to be. I know how much time this is going to be. Then I'm curious on the other side is that you get the money. You have to make choices about where the money goes as well. I'm curious, take me through that. How do you, I know you're married. How do
Yeah.
you two make choices about where does the money go exactly? How do you two talk about money?
We don't actually, surprisingly enough. We don't have a lot of conversations about money. I think because we've not had recently we've been fortunate enough to not really be in a lot of stressful situations with money. Now, I will say that that's not always been the case with us and our situation. We're just sort of right now kind of on cruise control, but there were there were years, maybe like, when you lived in New York and when my kids were very young, when things were a lot more stressful with money, then you're talking about it all the time.
Yeah.
So, we're fortunate that right now, I think that like I said, we're sort of on cruise control. But the thing that I think we've both learned over the years is that we know that this won't always be the case. Like, there may be money
Mm.
this year, next year there may be nothing. So we have to prepare for that. My wife, she's had a good job for a good career, but she left her job in September of last year and became a consultant. So now she's basically a freelancer too. Like she's, consulting and making all of her money on 1099s. So for the last year, we were both kind of like essentially freelancing. And that was kind of a wild year where she had to figure it all out, but also I had kind of lost a little bit of the ballast of her having kind of a guaranteed paycheck and health insurance.
Yeah.
And so that was a tough year where we really had to navigate a lot of stuff and talk about money a lot. But when we made it out to the other side and we just finished our taxes for last year, we realized that we figured it out. You know what I mean? And now, and I don't think that, her goal, she's in graduate school, which is part of why she went into doing this. She went back to school. And when she finishes grad school, she'll be able to get a different job and then things will go back to normal or whatever that may be. But
Mm.
we made it through, and I really think that the reason we made it through this kind of crazy year where she became, kind of made this big jump to go to grad school and become a consultant was really because we had spent the last decade figuring out how to manage my income being completely freelance. You know what I mean? Like, so we did it once. It wasn't that tough to figure out how to do it twice, but it did require us to do things like buy insurance on the exchange. It did require us to think through things like, incorporate like LLCs and what the and taxes and business expenses and stuff like that. But we figured it out, and so we made it through that year.
I'm curious. So it's like for couples who are both freelance or one person in it freelance, what what tips do you have for them to make it through the end of the tunnel or to constantly head down that tunnel in a safe direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's all about, like I said, not spending all the money that you have in the bank, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you
Mm.
got it. You have to have something saved and something put aside, and because freelancing, it's precarious. I mean, even if I've had periods of the last decade where like I had a contract, right, where it was guaranteed money, it is a contract for a certain number of months or whatever, and I knew how much I was getting, and that's sort of, I could manage that the way you'd manage any other job. But the problem is you have no guarantee when the contract's over that they're gonna renew it, right? And that you're gonna be able to keep going with that. So you have to plan on the fact that, like, once that contract's up, you may have this huge hole in your budget, that you've gotta figure out how to fill pretty quickly. So, I think that having money saved up and whatever it takes to do that, right? Whatever it takes to build that sort of safety net up is what you have to do to really make this work so that you don't feel the constant stress of I'm not going to pay bills this month if I don't sell X, Y, or Z. Because the truth is that it's not a matter of effort. I mean, the thing about being a writer or being a creative worker, tell people all the time, like writing is not typing. Like it's not a matter of effort. It's a matter of inspiration, right? Like, and that you can't control that either. Just as like you were saying, you can't control gatekeepers who have the access to your ability to make money. You also can't control inspiration. You don't know that you're going to come up with enough good ideas over the course of a year to sell and make money. So, you know what I mean? So like this is like
Yeah.
when you have them, you have to make the most out of them. You have to figure out how to make money now so that you can build up the cushion you need for the times where you're not going to have any ideas and you're not going to have any work coming in. And I think also developing and honing skills beyond sort of your main whatever hustle is key too. Like I had to figure out how to do a lot of types of writing that I've never done before. I had to figure out how to do a lot of types of stuff that, that I could make money at, but that I didn't necessarily have experience in because I had to be able at any given time to be able to turn in this direction or that direction to find a paycheck if I didn't have one coming in from my main, you know, work. So learning whatever, like figuring out how to diversify your craft or whatever, I think is kind of key to being freelancer too, and not having a lot of preciousness about the work and the writing that you're doing.
Yeah, I was just gonna say precious is trying to avoid that because you have a need, you have a demand. So that's so interesting because you said like, okay, we needed to build this. We agreed that we needed a safety net because we're both you and Katie are both being on freelance. How did you decide how much is a right amount for a safety net?
Well, that's a good question. And what's sort of funny is that like whatever the monthly budget is, it seems like it only goes up. You know what I mean? It never goes down. Like because we have kids and we for whatever stupid reason kept adding to the number of children we had. And then the kids just get bigger. And as they get bigger, they spend more of our money, right? Like as they get older. Like, I don't know. I mean, people out there who have
Yeah.
babies or whatever may think that babies are expensive and they are, and little kids are expensive, but man, it gets worse. I mean, they just keep,
What are you
they
dealing with right now with kids and expenses?
well, my oldest kid is 13. So this kid, he like goes out in the world and actually spends money. You know what I mean? Like I actually have to he has a phone with like Apple Cash on it. So like he's
Oh
expensive,
my gosh.
but like just the food that you have to buy for kids, like they go from like whatever, eating like kid food to like eating the same thing that we're eating. And so now it's like the amount of groceries we buy goes
Yeah.
up. The amount of money it costs to go out to dinner goes up. So like all of it the line just the amount of money that it costs continues to go up even though we're not doing anything different. It's just that our children are getting older, right? And so
Yeah.
that's been a struggle because just when you think you've got it figured out and it's like, okay, I can manage this much a month. It's like, wait, why are we spending more? Why are we spending more this month? Oh, it's because our kids need more money. And a major cost for us, like every parent, is like childcare stuff, after school stuff.
Yeah.
And that doesn't go away. I mean, even when they get older, they get into school. I used to tell parents, like younger parents, I'd say, just hold on for the first 5 years and it gets better because it does. Like when we lived in Brooklyn and we paid for childcare because we both had jobs we went to all day, every day, and our kids were under 5 years old. We were desperate to get them into school so that we were paying more money in childcare than we paid in rent. This is why we were so
Do you remember
grateful.
how much what your high amount was, or your total amount was for childcare at some
Yeah,
point?
we were paying over $3,000 a month for childcare, and that was when our rent was under $3,000 a month.
Yeah, that's 6K right
So
there.
yeah, so getting our kids into school, it was like, wow, we could afford a much nicer apartment or a car or something. Like it felt like we were rich once we got our kids into school, and also we were living in this. Our kids were just old enough that they hit like when this was a big issue in New York City at one point where de Blasio passed universal pre-K. So basically you could get your kids into public school at 4, into pre-K became public, and that was like a godsend, you know what I mean? Because it was just like 1 year we got a 1 year pardon, from our sentence.
Yeah.
But so I used to tell parents all the time, like, just get to wait till they get into school and things will get better. But that's temporary because eventually, like I said, the costs come rolling back in. And also, like, you still need things for them to do after school. The summers, because in America, we still don't go to school in the summer, which is so stupid. Like, you got to figure out, you got to come out of your pocket all summer long to send kids to summer camp and all this other goofy shit during the summer. So, it just becomes like this never ending expense. And it's a big one. It's a big cost for the kids, all the like after school stuff and the summer stuff. And I honestly, it's like, it feels like such a privilege to be able to afford it because I don't know how working parents are able to manage. This is why a lot of families need lots of family help
Yeah.
when they have kids because, working people in this country where both parents have jobs and then their kids, they're only in school till like 3 o'clock. Well, the workday doesn't end at 3, and then they're out all freaking summer and their parents are still working. It's ridiculous. Like childcare is a major, major expense for all families in this country. And it's ridiculous that, it has to be a privilege to be able to afford this. Otherwise, your kids are either alone at home, which I know people who let their kids stay home alone, or they're with, you have to lean on family members, grandparents and the like, which is what my parents did with me when I was growing up. I basically was raised at my grandparents' house because I had 2 working parents. So that was decades ago. I'm super ancient. So this is still not changed in this country. And, whatever, now I'm making a political rant, but we need some sort of like subsidized childcare.
Yeah, I mean, this in summer camp, I'm working with a lot of clients right now who are having to pay those summer camp bills, and that's like $7,000 to $15,000 for those experiences that I'm saving. It's like, oh, how do I find this 9 grand? You know. So I'm curious. You've been able to say yes to things, um, just like income. You've like when to say no to projects or know how much you can bite off. Are there times that you can think of you've decided to say no to spending as you've seen it go up?
It's funny. I was talking to you recently about how our families now we use like credit card points to travel. We never traveled. Like we've never traveled. We'd never taken vacations. I mean, we'd go see my mother in Arkansas. Like that was the extent of the
Yeah.
travel we would do is like to go visit family, and we'd pile up in the car and drive across country and stay at her house because we didn't have any money for plane tickets or for hotel rooms.
Yeah.
So travel is a big thing that we went without for years, and just it's only been in the last 2 years that we've been able to figure out how to budget for travel mainly by using credit card points. I mean, that's some of that's our own fault because we have a large family, and traveling with 5 is 5 plane tickets now, so
Yeah.
it can be costly, and eating out meals when you're traveling can be very expensive. So yeah, we went years and years and years without ever traveling. But we lived in New York City, and something about living in New York City, you just sort of you're in the center of the world, so you don't feel the need to travel. You're like you've got it all right
Yeah.
there.
So then how do you think about you are traveling? What about I know Gus is getting older. You said 13. How old? You've got 3 or 4 years to college 5
Yeah.
years. How do you think about college for your
Well,
3?
I'm constantly telling my kids how wonderful the SUNY system is here in New York because in New York we have this thing called the Excelsior scholarship, and so New York citizens whose parents make under a certain amount of money every year can essentially get free tuition at any SUNY school. But even for parents who aren't over that, the SUNY schools are fairly cheap for New York State residences, and they're pretty good schools. So my plan for my children's college is to do everything I can to encourage them to either not go to college or to go to a SUNY school and to pray that they don't decide they want to go to an Ivy League or some shit like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's great that they have that available. Like the state of California, it's gotten the UCs are also great, but it's also gotten very, very expensive.
Yeah, New York, I think we've got, I think we're doing the right things in New York State with our investments in higher education here to make it easier for families. But the thing is that we I don't think that we haven't saved a dime. So whatever, we may be irresponsible parents. We haven't saved up, but it's like, neither my wife nor I had our parents pay for any of our college tuition. We went to college, so it sort of wasn't ingrained in us that that's something that we're expected to do for our kids. And so what I say to my kids, like when I talk to Gus about this, who's only recently even started to think about it, is like I say to him, like, if you want to go to Harvard and you get into Harvard, great, but I can't pay for it, man. So we're gonna, that means that you and I both are gonna be going into debt for you to go there. So you better, make sure that I mean, if that's what he wants to do and that's his dream, I'm gonna help him do it. But I haven't saved any money for it, nor am I going to, because it's also such a long shot that he would get into a place like that or to any school like that. So why save money? Why put money aside for this thing that may never happen, particularly when we live in a state where there's such public investment in higher education that
Yeah.
we have good institutions here that we could go to that are affordable that we're essentially paying for now with all the freaking taxes that we pay in New York. You know what I mean? So I kind
Yeah.
of want to get a return on that investment first before I start looking at
You know,
Harvard.
you said something interesting. You said like with college, it's like why to save money for something we don't even know is going to happen. And I think I hear that a lot with like goals because that's a lot of my work is like helping people save for goals, even if it's like a year or two out, 5 years, 30 years. Well, 30 years is usually for hope is retirement.
Mhm.
And people will say that to me, like, why save a retirement? It's so far out. I don't know what that means. How do you approach retirement savings,
Well,
Dave Hill?
my wife and I are both very lucky that we had a lot of years working in union jobs where we have defined benefit pensions. So there's some amount of money that we'll both get from being fortunate to have defined benefit pensions, which have really died out in America because of the sort of systematic destruction of the labor movement over the last whatever
Yeah.
50 years. So there aren't as many defined benefit pension plans out there available, but we both benefit from that.
Which just for everybody to know is that at a certain age, you'll get a paycheck every month for as long as you live, right?
Right, and so a lot of people call 401ks pension plans, right? You'll ask people like, "Do you have a pension?" They'll say, "Yes," but they have a 401k. A 401k is just your money in the stock market, and when you get to be retirement age, you get to start withdrawing that money. A pension plan is money that was essentially deferred compensation. Your employer contributed money to a pension plan, and then that pension plan guarantees you a certain amount of money for the rest of your life after you reach a certain age. It's usually the formula is some percentage of your like average income from the last 10 years you worked at a place or whatever. So that's kind of how these pensions work. And mostly only union members in America have them. In fact, a lot of increasingly only public sector union members have them in America, right? Like
Teachers,
teachers and cops and firefighters, like
nurses,
cops,
yeah.
you'll meet. I met a retired cop just the other day. The dude was my age. You know what I mean? It's like, what? You're retired, but it's like 20 and out because they have such a good pension. So
Yeah.
that's where you'll see these. But we also have we both have 401ks that we've contributed to over the years. So when I did have a W2 job, I was very aggressive about putting money into 401k and getting a match. So that's essentially free money. Um, and then now that I'm self-employed, I have a SEP, so it's like
Mhm.
it's a plan for self-employed people that they can put money into tax deferred. So I put money into a SEP. There's less and less money to put in there every year, but I try to always put money into the SEP so that I have some tax deferred, retirement income. So we're both pretty good at that. I think. When I talk to other folks that are my age about how much money that they have saved, sometimes I feel like we don't have enough, but then I realize like relative to a lot of people our age, we
Yeah.
have a lot. So I feel like we're doing okay. I'd like to save more for retirement, but it just requires making more, right? It's all a function of like, a percentage of your income. If I don't make a whole lot, I can't afford to save a whole lot, but I
Well,
am
you also, it's
saving.
interesting. I agree. It's like that income defines, but also your expenses, like how much you're able to say, okay, we don't value saving for college, but we do value retirement and we do value, experiences for the kids. Obviously, they
Mhm.
need some kind of childcare, at least at some point.
Yeah.
But actually, this goes to my earlier question of like where to put money that is saved or like how to define that. I want to ask you again about the savings nets. What am I saying? Trying to say emergency fund and
Mhm.
having that money set aside for when you think of like both of you are freelancers. You could tell me, I'm curious if you want to, you could tell me what number you decided like we needed. You could say like how many months, like 6 months, we saved 50,000, 40,000. I'm curious, how did you decide like this is the right amount to save up? And also
Well,
we'll edit this, by the
no,
way.
it's fine.
Anything
Yeah,
you don't
sure.
want
I
to say.
mean, I may be an interesting, might be a unique guest to talk to about this particular question because I actually spend a lot of time gambling, which you probably think is an irresponsible way to spend money. When my wife and I first got married, I at the time when I was single spent a lot of time gambling because I had a lot of disposable income, and I actually think I was pretty good at it. I played a lot of poker, and I had a bunch of money in the bank when we got married a million years ago. And so when we got married, the deal was that I was going to take like all my life, I always kept two separate bank accounts. One bank account that's like my money that I pay bills out of and put my paychecks into. And then I always had a separate bank account that was for money that I was gambling so that I could not lie to myself about how much money I was up or down at any given time. Like it was like, clear as day, like whatever was in that account was how much money I was up. And so when we got married, the deal was that we would take all of that money and we'd use it to pay for the wedding and to buy a house, right? So that's what we did. We liquidated it, and so I was retired from gambling once I got married, and then slowly I started getting, as we got older and made a little bit more money, I started doing it again and started building the gambling bank account back up. And every time it gets to a certain amount of money, she takes it and spends it on something, splurges on something we need, whether it's something for the house, or buy a car or something like that. So currently we need to renovate this house we bought because our it's a three-bedroom house. We have three kids. You can do the math. At some point, we can't have two kids sharing a room anymore. So we wanted to renovate the attic and put a bedroom up there. And it's going to cost like an insane amount of money. So we've decided we're just going to we're going to take all the money that I've made betting on football and basketball and use that to renovate the house. And so that money plus whatever money we can sock away from saving every week sort of all goes into the same account. And, it's hovers right now around $80,000 is in that account, but the amount of money that we've been quoted to renovate this attic to turn it into a bedroom is it's like, over $50,000. So the bulk of that money will probably just get sunk into renovations to our house. So but that's kind of like what I say is like that's part of why we need to have money in savings is because
Yeah.
we can only put that's sounds in some ways renovating your house sounds like a luxury or something like that. But in our case, it's a necessity because we could only afford a three-bedroom house. We have three children and they're getting older and they can't all, they're running out of space in the rooms that we're sharing. So we need an extra bedroom. We can't buy another house, a four-bedroom house. We're going to turn this house into a four-bedroom. So that isn't, it becomes a necessity in our life. So we're going to save and spend the money on that. We're lucky that the Chiefs have done as well as they have over the last couple of years in the NFL, but but it's that's a big expense for us, but it's one that they will and it'll eat up once it's done, it'll eat up a bunch of our savings and we have to start right back over. But I do think that like for my comfort level and for the level that we're in and for the situation we're in right now with three kids, like, it's if we can keep even just like 10 to $20,000 in savings in the bank that we can access when we need it, then I feel very lucky and fortunate to have that much money available to us, right? And that's for a lot of people, that's a lot of money. I think most Americans can access $2,000, in an emergency. I think most Americans, so I feel very privileged to be able to say that that's like where we want to, where what our goal is to have, and it may not always be possible, because the thing about a rainy day fund is that a rainy day happens and then it's gone, right?
Yeah.
But we work to try to, keep at least that much money accessible at any given time. And I will say that, even just 5 years ago, before COVID or whatever, like, that was not a possibility for us, and
Mm,
we had like, a line of credit at our bank, right? So we had, like, a $10,000, like, line of credit at the bank that we would constantly dip into, during those years when I was, like, writing the book and first starting out as a freelancer, and that kind of saved our asses a lot, but I didn't like that, you know what I mean? Because it's like you're paying interest on that, and you never,
yeah.
it always felt like a real gamble to, like, go deep into that $10,000 line of credit. So, you know, um, to me, it's like having a $10,000 line of credit or having $10,000 in the bank. I'd prefer to have $10,000 in the bank and treat it like that. You know what I mean? Treat it like having that $10,000 line of credit, sort of safety net.
You say that you're putting money away. How much do you put away a month, and how do you decide how much to put away a month?
Yeah, I don't think that what ends up happening isn't that we put a certain amount of money away every month. I think the way that I've come to think about it is that I have so like I'm ghostwriting a book right now, and that's a contract that I signed, and it's like I get a certain amount of money for ghostwriting this book. It'll take me like a year to do it or whatever, and I think of that as being kind of my base salary, right? And then if I do anything in the interim, like a magazine piece, or like I just submitted something to an editor this morning that I'll get paid like $1,000 for, like any of that kind of stuff, that's going to get socked away into, that kind of gets put to the side and is essentially savings, right? Because I'm budgeting around the book contract. And the other stuff that I'll do, I'll try to keep in savings, and that seems to work.
Yeah.
It definitely worked when Katie had a paycheck and we could also budget around her paycheck. Now she sort of has these gigs kind of like me, so we can't budget around what she's doing, and it makes it a little bit more challenging to do this. And again, next year I won't have a ghostwriting contract for a book, so I'll have to figure out something else to do, right? But while I have it, then I want to continue to work on the side as much as I have the sort of bandwidth, headspace for, and then that becomes savings. So it's not a month to month thing. It's more like a assignment to assignment thing that gets
Yeah.
stuck into the bank for savings.
I think that's great. I think what's interesting is that you know how much you're going to make with the base, and then you have these additional contracts that come in or you work on throughout the year. Do you have a sense on the other side of the thumbs up? Do you have a sense on the how much you're spending a month? Like, do you know if I ask you, like, Dave, how much does the family cost for 30 days?
Probably about $8,000, I think, is our area of what we spend every month.
How confident are you in that number?
I think that it's never below 8 and it's never above 10.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
That's how it
You know
feels.
that there's going to be those expenses. Yeah. And
It's
it
gonna be
shouldn't go
somewhere
higher.
it's gonna somewhere in that zone, between 8 and 10.
You talked about how groceries go up. Do you have a sense how much you spend on groceries? Because that is like the number one. When I build budgets with clients, they're like, I have no idea what the right amount I should be spending on groceries.
Yeah, our groceries seem like it's at this point, like, our life is such like Groundhog Day that it feels like that never changes, you know what I mean? Like, it's always and we've also, like, um so we do try to do a lot of, like, credit card point maximizing, which sometimes requires us to change up where we're shopping, but for the most part, we, like, have certain things we buy at Costco and certain things we buy at the regular grocery store, so it's always, like, 2 trips, but
Yeah.
we're big Costco people. We have the, like I have the black Costco card, like, we spend a lot of money there.
Yeah. You got to feed a lot of people. It's a lot. Especially, yeah, living in those hotels 15 years ago, you were just eating probably a cup of noodles,
No, I didn't. I
20
ate
bucks a
out every
month.
meal.
Oh, yeah.
I was in terrible shape.
There's
I
no
had no money,
groceries.
no groceries. I lived in this apartment with some guys in the city, but I was never there, and I never once cooked a meal in that apartment in, like, a decade or whatever. I never cooked a meal. I was always eating out because I just learned I'd accustomed myself to eating out every single meal in my life for
Yeah.
15 years.
Have you grown accustomed to not eating every meal out now?
We never eat out. Never, never. It's so expensive with this many kids.
Yeah,
I
you
mean,
don't value
that's not
it.
that we do go out to eat. Every time we go out to eat, it's never it is it I never don't experience sticker shock when I take my children out to eat. It's always still shocking to me to be like, "Oh my god, why did we go out to eat?"
Yeah, it's too much money. You do other things and you work on your home and you're building an attic into a bedroom.
Right, like, we don't take the kids out to eat. My wife and I don't go out to eat. We don't spend any time out on at the house. I mean, one way that I think we're probably able to, like, stick to the budget is we definitely don't do a lot of fun stuff that costs a lot of money. If folks are listening to this and they think like, "Wow, that's awesome that he's got, whatever, $50,000 in the bank," just know that it means life is very boring. You know, that's the
Yeah.
trade-off.
Yeah. You gotta make those choices. It is a trade-off. It is, you gotta identify what you value the most, and I think you'd be a lot more stressed doing freelance. I think you'd be stressed if you couldn't build out a 4th bedroom for the 5th person in your house, essentially. So, yeah. Dave David Hill, thank you so much for meeting me and doing this podcast. I really appreciate it, and, I hope to have you on again because there's so much still I wanna talk to you about your work and how that's changed.
I would love to do it again. Anytime you wanna talk, I'm always happy to talk money.
Thank you, Dave. So fun having Dave Hill on. He's going to come back on. He's going to talk about his gambling. And he's going to talk about how he is hopefully has maybe an attic at this point for his 3rd child to live in. Thank you all for listening. If you like any of this, I am a one-on-one financial coach. This is what I do for a living. I get to talk to people, help them build out their financial life, giving them systems, accountability, and financial education because we don't live in a society where we talk about these things. And so I'll say like, okay, what do you want to get done? And we accomplish those goals together as a coach and as a team. Thank you to my team of producers, Will Hagel, John DeBryan. They put this together for us. They're amazing. And head to my website if you want to learn more about financial coaching, dylanteachesfinance.com. And also, I have a wonderful newsletter I write. It's not an AI newsletter. I put it together. I think of it as a newsletter for people who don't necessarily want to read personal finance. I write it for you. Thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you next week.